the more money we made, the more unhappy we were. Is what I would say. Yeah, like the more money we made, the farther we got away from the vision, and the more time we just spent working on business logistics, the less happy we were.
Welcome, everyone, to This Was The Scene, the podcast that takes a look back at the late 90s, early 2000 punk scene. I am your host, Mike Doyle. Before we start, feel free to support the podcast if you've been listening for a while by signing for the Patreon over at patreon.com/thiswasthescene. You can sign up for $1 a month, and I will think you're the coolest person in the entire universe. Seaweed was an American band from Tacoma, Washington, who were active throughout the 1990s. Their style of music is a combination of various rock subgenres, including grunge and post-hardcore. I heard of these guys back in like the mid-90s when my good buddy Bob Bikel, he had their CD, and I heard Start With. I love this fucking song, and when I started playing bass, this was one of the first like riffs I learned. Like the beginning of the song, I learned how to play that on bass, even though it's a guitar riff, but I would kind of like play that as my warm-up. You know, when you go to see a band and they're like setting up and then like the guitarist just doing some weird riff, or the drummer would always be doing that fucking drum fill from The Refused just to show how badass they were on drums. Well, I would be playing this on my bass because I just love the way it sounded. So I got a message from someone, and I currently can't find that message on Instagram, so I apologize to the person who suggested I interview Seaweed. So like when you hear this, you know it's you. I can't sift through all the Instagram messages. Not saying I'm like, I'm popular or anything, but I can't find the fucking message. So just message me and I'll credit you in all the places that I post this. So super sorry about that. But this person suggested I interview Seaweed. I thought that was a great idea because of knowing that riff from Start With and loving that song and just like remembering Spanaway. So I did a little digging, and it was funny because I found out that Aaron, who I interview, is singing for this band called Ghostwork, which has ex-members of Snapcase, Minus the Bear, and Mile Marker. So you should go check that out. It's really good. It's on Spotify. We talk about that. But yeah, I reached out to them and said I want to talk to Aaron. They reached out to Aaron. Aaron emailed me, and we got on the Skype, and this is what we talk about. The early 90s Tacoma scene, his thoughts on playing in Seattle at that time, being on Sub Pop Records, free records for a lifetime from Sub Pop, flannel shirts, his thoughts on their record Spanaway, the story about the green lighter on Spanaway, on the cover, and a ton more. Just real quick, this starts off with us talking on his computer, and then I had to call him from Skype for something happened. So the audio is kind of all over the place, and in the middle, he had to jump off, so I reconnect with him later. So there's like some weird cuts through this thing, and I apologize, but unless you're like really paying attention, you're probably going to miss it. There's like one spot where I kind of had to splice some weird shit, so the conversation sounds like it just kind of goes weird. But it's still a great interview because I just think it is. This week's sponsor is Mint 400 Records. Mint 400 Records is an indie record label from New Jersey with bands across the United States, Canada, and Europe. The label features everything from indie rock and folk to post-punk and soul. Over 370 exciting releases. You can find Mint 400 Records releases streaming at Spotify, Pandora, Tidal, Apple Music, Amazon Music, Deezer, and more, or at all MP3 outlets worldwide. Visit mint400records.com for links and more info. Here's a clip from the song Fill Me Up by the band Swims. Definitely go check that out. Before we begin, two other ways to support the podcast. One, you can donate one time at thiswasthescene.com. Just scroll down on the homepage and click that purple button. You can Venmo or PayPal or whatever, anything you want. Two, you can buy merch on thiswasthescene.com. I'm starting to do small runs of shirts that are just going to be like drops. The one I have coming up right now, it's a guy riding a Peloton bike and says, "This is now the scene." And there's a little nod to Midtown on the shirt, which Rob Hitt found. You could see it if you go and follow the Instagram account for This Was the Scene, and you should do that. And you should go sign up for the email because I'm sending out emails. So people on the email list are going to know about the shirts first. So you can go to thiswasthescene.com, and there's going to be a pop-up at some point where you can put your email in, and then I'll email you stuff. Cool. Feel free to subscribe, leave a review, and share this with anyone who would love some punk rock nostalgia. With that said, let's get started.
I am a medical professional, and so I'm very used to scripting my sentences prior to saying them, so I think it should be okay.
Oh, wow. Yeah, you got to have that good bedside manner, I guess.
Exactly. I mean, you know, the distance between punk rock singer and nurse is long, and I have trained myself to be the latter now.
So how's that been, before we jump in, like how's that been obviously going this past 5 years? Well, it's really been 11 months, but it feels like 5 years.
You know, I live in a rural place, so it hasn't really been that bad, knock wood, so far. And actually during like the first big surge, which is when it was the worst at our hospital, I was on vacation. It just happened to be that way. Like I generally go on a yearly trip back to Washington and Canada and Oregon. And I didn't go on that trip this year, obviously. I had the time off and I just decided to take it, and it worked out great.
Wow.
I missed all the multiple, but even that, like, you know, our ER is only 10, I don't know if there's ever been like 3 COVID patients at the same time, probably, but you know, I don't think 4. But you never know. Like, there's so many people are asymptomatic. You know what I mean? Who knows who is what? You know?
Yeah. Where are you? Because you're still out in Washington, right? Is that because
I moved to Northern California, actually, to where I live now. Like, my Seaweed was still a band.
Oh wow. Okay. Oh cool. We can talk about that a little bit too. Yeah, man, it was so someone reached out to me because I posted on my Instagram and said, what band should I reach out to? Because I have a list of, when I started this 3 years ago, it was focused on New Jersey, and then I started branching out and talking to bands that, influenced, I feel like, the scene, and then also bands that technically, like, you guys weren't, like, you guys kind of went through the scene, but you weren't. By the time I got into it, that's when you guys had put out, I think, like your last album or second, as we put Spanaway out, and it was about a year or two before that. So I'm interested to figure out like how you guys weaved in and out of it. I was like asking who should I reach out to, and someone was like, "Oh, you should ask Seaweed," and I was like, "Fuck, man, that's a great idea," because Start With was such. When I started really getting into music and branching out, my buddy introduced me to that song, and I loved that fucking song so much. And then like he had Spanaway, so we'd listen to that. And I was like, I wonder if I should, reach out. And then I did. And then I know I'm going to talk a lot, but I'll stop for a second. I'll stop. But then I found you guys, you started Ghost Work with like members of Minus the Bear, Snapcase, and Mile Marker. And it was just so funny because you guys had just started that. Technically, you guys put your album out like recently or this year, right?
Yeah. Well, those guys, the rest of Ghost Work, they had been playing together for a couple years. I was like the last addition. And I think Chris from Braid was singing with them before, but it didn't really work out. And I don't know if they ever I've never met any of those people. Like, I don't know them. I sing like this, like we're doing on Skype.
Oh, really?
It's Logic. I mean, I think maybe I met Dustin from Snapcase like one time, like before he was in Snapcase, like at a Seaweed show. I have a vague memory of meeting him, but he's the only one. Oh, and then Aaron, the drummer, I definitely played a show with Kill Sadie in a band after Seaweed. So we played a show together, but like I never have, played music with them or anything. I just sing over their stuff.
They just like reached out to you from knowing your voice and we're like, hey, do you want to try out for this?
Exactly. And then I was like, go ahead. Cause I just was like, I bet you they're a hardcore band. Like, I was like, send me some music. I'll listen to it, whatever. But then I liked it, it reminded me of like The Cure and My Bloody Valentine, except for kind of post-punk.
Yeah.
And I was like, yeah, I'll sing. That sounds cool. I was like, basically I don't want to play shows. I won't play shows. but I will record music, like, because I record music a lot by myself, so, and I have the gear and it's fun.
Yeah, I think that's also a point where you did it for so long. There's either you have an itch for it, or you're like, no, I'm good. That was a good part of my life. I don't want to do the van on the road or whatever again.
Yeah, my ears are hammered. Like, I'm trying to protect what's left of them, and if I was singing in a mic with a rock band, my voice would probably last about a half a set,
Yeah.
It's not 1991 anymore.
Oh man, this is great. So basically, again, this podcast started off a couple years ago, focusing on really just the Jersey pop punk scene in the late '90s, and through that, I started. It was like about 30 episodes in, and I was like, well, okay, I'm not running out of people to talk to, but I really wanted to expand, and it just went off in this direction. And actually, it's funny you mentioned Chris from Braid. Like, I interviewed him. And just all these bands that I used to love. I interviewed William from Sunny Day Real Estate for episode 100 because I'm just this diehard Sunny Day Real Estate fan. So it was like this opened the door to talk to these bands that I remembered from my personal experience growing up. So this leads to this, and it's interesting because you guys started in basically what, like 89, and then went all the way up to 99 and broke up?
That's it.
Basically, where we left off is I had asked to describe the scene that you guys were in at that time, and then talk about how you got involved with Seaweed, and we can go from there.
Oh yeah, so I was telling about how Tacoma's had a thriving punk rock scene basically in the '80s, and part of that was because there had been this kind of mini riot thing at a Circle Jerk show in Seattle where they had like closed down the show, and then it was snowing and kids threw snowballs at the cops. And so then like basically Seattle was like, we're not going to have any more shows. There was some teen dance ordinance basically that said you couldn't have shows. So all the promoters would have shows in Tacoma, which was because we're like, Tacoma's a whole different city from Seattle. And it's basically about kind of like an hour away. It's one of those things like in, New York and New Jersey, it depends on what time that hour is. Could be like a 3-hour trip or like a 1-hour trip, And the traffic wasn't as bad back then anyway, because Seattle was a different city in the 80s than it is now for sure. There was like 2 different venues and there was constantly shows. Me and the rhythm section for Seaweed were in various punk rock bands. I knew them from bands basically. And so we were all kind of old friends in a way. I mean, or fellow musicians in the small town, not small, but, mid-sized city. And so we kind of knew them, and the shows were cool. And there were, there was a lot of like variants of what you saw. Like you'd see like full on punk stuff like Poison Idea, which would be crazy, and super violent and filled with skinheads and just craziness. And then, like you'd see Soundgarden and bands that later became Pearl Jam and stuff, like there was like all the proto grunge stuff. Like the guys from Pearl Jam and Mudhoney, various different ones were in this band called Green River. And then there was this band called Malfunction, which was the singer who went on to be in Mother Love Bone, which was like the original band before Pearl Jam. But none of these bands were popular. They were like playing this kind of hard rock at punk shows to like 8 people,
Was that the singer that did the tribute to that guy?
Yeah.
Okay.
He was excellent in Malfunction. It was amazing. He like wore this like dirty feather boa zip up and like some spandex and played like a Steinlager bass that was purple and like had terrible lipstick on, and was like, if he was playing to 6 people, he'd be playing like to 8,000 in his mind, in his actions.
I feel like that's like a weird time because it was a mixture of glam, punk, and then the whole like grunge thing. Is that what people basically would look like? It would look like in the crowds and the bands?
It just looked like punk rock fans, actually, for the most part. Like, like grunge wasn't even a word. I mean, it never really was. It was just like a term that the press made. It was pretty much all just kind of considered more or less punk rock, but like Seattle just had, Washington in general just had a pretty wide range of what would be considered punk. I think that if you went to a club in Seattle, it might look more glammy, but I was a teenager, so I wasn't old enough to go to any of those places,
I've talked to a bunch of people that I talked to, and the reason that they got into the local scene, like the punk scene, is they felt that it was like they felt that they could talk to the person playing in front of them in a Legion Hall. Like, did you have that feeling, or was that like a part of the feeling of what drew you to going to shows because you felt that there was this connection?
Well, I'd say more than anything, it was just that I just was a big music nerd from the time that I was a kid, like, and I listened to the radio a lot, and I started collecting records like literally in second grade. I knew that there was a lot going on between Olympia and Seattle, and I was very interested in all of it. I wanted to see every act that I ever read in the weekly, or, there was like a decent magazine in Seattle. I read all about all the bands, and I wanted to see them and collect the records.
Did you have some kind of vision when you were a kid that you wanted to be a singer in a band eventually, or did that just kind of just happen randomly?
Oh, I totally wanted to be a singer in a band, and I wanted to be not necessarily a singer because I think Seaweed and Ghostwork is the only bands I've ever been in where I was the singer exclusively, but I wanted to be some sort of brain behind a band, for sure.
So like when you started going to local shows or going to shows, did you feel that it was like by watching that it was possible for you to do that?
Oh, definitely. I mean, I started playing shows when I was like 15, just by myself with an acoustic guitar and singing, and I played at punk shows. More or less within like 6 months of going to the first punk show, I probably played my first punk show. So it always was like a give and take, like, oh, they're doing that. I was like a nerdy record collector, so we were super down on punk, like Mohawk and that kind of punk,
Yeah.
Like the punk, I loved punk, but to me, punk was about like having a thick record collection and not like taking acid on the weekend and having a Mohawk.
Was that the time when you were collecting, because CDs were coming out around then, right? Like were you collecting mostly that or like vinyl or cassettes? Like what was your...
No, vinyl, for sure. I didn't have it. Like, I think that maybe like later when I was a teenager, I actually got a CD player. But no, I've always had a record player. You to this day have a record player, I also have a CD player though. I think I have all but a cassette player. I actually do not have a cassette player. I've got loads of cassettes, and it's funny because like at the end of our dirt road, like you can just like leave stuff out. It's like a free box kind of. And somebody's parent died, and like there was just like loads of shit going out there every day. And my wife was like, "Oh, I saw this like white cassette tape deck like player, and I almost got it for you, but like I didn't." And then I thought about that you'd want it, so I went back down there to get it. And like Al, this kind of like, I don't know if he's exactly homeless or what, but he rides his bike around all the time. She's like, he had gotten it and he was all stoked on it. So I'm kind of like, well, I'm stoked that he was stoked on that,
That's awesome. It's funny that you mentioned the tape cassette thing. This kind of jumps just to sidetrack to Ghostwork. Like you guys have a cassette tape to buy on your Bandcamp.
Right. I have the cassette in my room. That's what I was like, I want a cassette player so I can like play it.
You can probably grab that shit on eBay, man. They're so probably inexpensive.
Right. It's just another piece of junk, though. You know what I mean? I just want the free one at the end of the road. I don't want it enough to buy one on eBay. Yeah,
because then you got to buy all the tapes with it too.
A buddy sent, like Clint from Seaweed sent me all these cassettes like not long ago from high school. But he was like, "You should have these. These are yours." Like one of them was like a 7 seconds cassette.
Oh shit!
Like the second record, the one after The Crew, Walk Together, Rock Together.
Dude, that album has come up so many times in interviews when I ask people what got them into the punk scene or music. They would say they were skateboarding in a parking lot or wherever, and someone would have a boombox or whatever, yeah, that or the car radio, and they would just be, that was like the record they always said that was playing in the background.
I love that record, like being a teenager for sure. And I saw them in Tacoma there was this one club called the Community World that we all were very involved in, and they played like one of the last shows there actually. They didn't even headline. I think Circle Jerks headlined. But it's funny because that was in like '87, and like already you were like, those guys, they're still around. Those guys are so old. You know? Until 82 or whatever. 1980. That's what in that song, you know. It all started back in 1980.
That's so fucking wild, man. Because just from going to the scene in like '97, I mean, that's so far from when you got into it, and that's so far from when like bands that influenced you had even started. It's almost like 2 decades, and now this is about 2 decades.
Well, and a lot had changed between. I mean, even if you just said from like '87 to '97, that actually is huge. A huge difference in like what was going on in music as far as the money. There was a lot more money in it in '97.
Yeah, because I think that's when they started to figure out they could monetize. I mean, granted, going back to the whole grunge term, that's when the music industry. I was listening to the Bad Religion book, Do What You Want. I just burned through it like last week, and Brett Gurewitz was talking about it, and he's like, Nirvana comes out, and then the record companies are like, oh shit, we can monetize heavy guitars again, or we could start doing that. So, like, I feel like that's when that started to really get popular in the 90s, and then late 90s was when the punk thing came out, and that was Warped Tour, and it was more, like, it just exploded even more, especially after Green Day and all that shit. So I think that's probably what inundated that with money to be spent.
Yeah. I mean, we kind of like, we felt it on 2 different waves because we kind of straddled the sound. So we,
yeah,
we felt the wave when it happened with Nirvana, and then we felt it again when it happened with, I mean, I feel like it wasn't really Green Day. It was Offspring that basically kicked the door open for punk, you know, and Green Day was kind of like second or third, I think.
they were like the same time. It was like them and Rancid. But there was like that
Well,
whole
we were like,
storm.
we toured with Green Day and Bad Religion when Dookie came out. And so we were actually on tour with them when that record came out. And like the fact that Green Day was opening for Bad Religion, like, and, you know, at the beginning of the tour, it made sense that Green Day was opening for them. And at the end of the tour, like by the middle, it was like people were leaving after Green Day kind of thing. You know?
Dude, your perspective or your viewpoint of this whole thing is crazy to me because especially where you grew up, going to shows in Seattle or being around it or close enough to it to see that whole thing explode. That was like the fucking epicenter in the early 90s. Like everyone was looking there. Everyone like based their clothes around that. So like when you guys formed the band, did you form like what was your style you were going for? Like we want to sound like this as a band.
It wasn't really. I mean, we liked the DC bands, honestly. Like they were, if there was a band that was most influential, I feel like we were very much into like Rites of Spring and Fugazi, you know, Dag Nasty. But you know, we also really loved Beat Happening and Black Flag and West Coast stuff, but and Soundgarden. So, but if like, you know, when Seaweed started, if you were like asking me what my favorite band is, like probably was like Rites of Spring and Fugazi, you know.
You're looking at that for influence, and you guys are starting to write songs, and then you're also in this Seattle scene, which was obviously the.
But we weren't in Seattle scene. We were from Tacoma. It was like a whole different town.
Right, which is close to it though, right? But
yeah, but it's different. It's like saying like Camden, New Jersey is Manhattan, kind of in a way. I mean,
interesting.
Just think about some, like, you know Jersey more than me, but just think about if you went like an hour out of this, you know,
totally.
Lower East Side. If you crossed the Holland Tunnel and you kept going for like 40 minutes, like that place is not Manhattan. You know what I mean?
True. I think I just think of it because like the access that you guys had was the 5, which wasn't the tunnels and tolls and all that shit. It seemed to me to get from where I grew up in Jersey, which was the fucking sticks, even though Jersey's about an hour coastal river. You're right, 100%. I mean, it would take me like I'd be like, I don't really want to go to New York. It's so different. They're such a pain in the ass. So we stayed here.
Right.
So for you guys in
And it's
Tacoma,
not just that, like we had stuff going on in Tacoma and Olympia. Like Olympia was only half an hour south of us and much easier to get a half an hour away than it is an hour away. We never played in Seattle. Literally, we never played a show in Seattle until after we were signed on Sub Pop.
really?
Like, no joke. Like we didn't play a single show in Seattle. We played Manhattan and Philly and DC and Boston before we ever played in Seattle.
Well, how long were you guys a band before you got signed? It seems like from what I'm looking at, it was pretty quick, right?
Yeah, like I think
Yeah, 91, you guys
I
were on
think
Sub
they
Pop.
signed us like basically we went on this tour in 1990, in the summer of 1990. Clint and I graduated from high school and we went on the tour east with Superchunk and did like 3 weeks. I knew Bruce Pavitt because he used to write about my act, my acoustic guitar act, Spook and the Zombies is what it was called. And we had a cassette on K, and he had written about us a lot and used to come to shows and stuff. And he had kind of expressed interest in doing something with Seaweed. And then when we were on that tour, a record label called Twin Tone in Minneapolis basically just said, we'll sign you guys and put your records out right now. So we kind of went back to Sub Up and we're like, well, Twin Tone wants to do it. We'd rather do it with you guys because you're local, but we need like more than just put out a single kind of we want to put a record out.
Well, how popular were you guys, or like locally though, in Tacoma? Like
not. We never played in Seattle, but I think our singles, we put out 3 singles by ourselves, and they actually did get airplay up in Seattle. And you know, if we played in Tacoma, we could play to like I don't know, 70 or 80 people, and same in Olympia. You know, maybe a little bit less in Olympia. But our name was known, and I think Sub Pop was impressed that like we went on a national tour without having ever played in Seattle. We were kind of like anti-Seattle. Like we didn't Tacoma like got a big chip on its shoulder because we're like the older city, you know,
yeah.
And we were like, fuck Seattle. Like
I can see that.
It's hard to explain. I mean, I feel like for being from New Jersey, you would understand that.
I do, because local shows were in Legion halls and firehouses and churches, and that to us was exciting because we could drive down a highway or 287 or 80 or whatever it was, and we'd pull up. There's a parking lot, and we'd get out, and all our friends were there, and then we go to diners and shit after. We made this thing out of it. And then New York New York doesn't have a scene. Like it had a scene in the 80s, but then it was, you'd only go in the city to see bigger bands touring. Like you wouldn't go there to see small bands because there's really no small bands living in Manhattan. So like I could see that with Seattle. I mean, well, those bands were in Seattle, but I could see where there's kind of a defiance of like, well, we got our own shit going down here. Like, fuck those guys.
Exactly.
They're not coming
Exactly.
here. Yeah.
And I mean, a huge amount of the export from our neck of the woods was the popular, like Nirvana was from Aberdeen. They're like from the Olympia area. Like that was our band. They didn't play in Seattle for years. We had like seen them for years in Olympia at punk shows. We all shared the same friend group. So, and like the same, we like with Beat Happening and Screaming Trees, all my favorite bands from that era weren't from Seattle, you know. The Seattle bands were like the money. I mean, it's not like they were rich, but it was like they had the access to the city and the media and the clubs in a way where we just had to do it ourselves, kind of. Or not exactly ourselves, because there was people that were doing it, like Calvin and stuff from Beat Happening. But it was at a much closer to ground level situation.
I mean, did you feel that energy back then? Because I mean, that was gigantic. I mean, there's a whole new scene that got carved out then. So to be around it at that time, granted, you're saying that you're like, well, fuck you, Seattle. Is that also based on, well, fuck you guys as well because the whole world is looking at you and you're not as cool as everyone thinks you are?
Yeah, but it was also just like people would be like, oh, well, Nirvana's from Seattle. And be like, well, they're not from Seattle. They're from Aberdeen. Like, like Washington's a big state, and there's like LA's like, I mean, Seattle's like the big LA and that people think of as Washington, you know, but there's like tons of stuff going on in the state to this day. You know, like the whole east side of the state is like a red state. Like it's total like gun-toting rednecks and Trump lovers, and that's not what you think of when you think of Washington.
Right.
But like if you cross the mountains, there's like a whole 3/4 of the state is a different thing. Now the populace of the state is all on the west side of the mountains, on the I-5 corridor. There's a lot going on beyond Seattle.
So tell me how you guys got, not how you got together, but like how did you go from like your first album you put out was because I'm looking at basically just like Wikipedia is kind of like my go-to here. So it says you guys an EP with Leopard Gecko Tupelo.
That was us. Leopard Gecko was the bass player. Owen Atkins now of Seaweed. That was his record label, and he put out all our original singles.
So you guys did that, and then that scored you a tour with Superchunk?
Yeah, like we had mutual friends basically, and that was like their first tour as well, you know.
Wow.
And they had Mac had a band before Superchunk called Wax with 2 W's, and they had a 7-inch on Leopard Gecko. And basically one of Atkins' good friends had gone to college with them with Mac at Columbia, so that kind of, he was like, Seaweed could go with you. And they knew about Seaweed because like all the little tiny record labels that sold 7 inches knew about who was selling, because your job was to call the record store and be like, oh, we buy this 7-inch, and they'd be like, well, you know, the Seaweed 7-inch is selling, or what selling means like you sold 3 copies or something.
What was that tour like for the first tour? I mean, this is also
it was really fun.
Yeah?
It was just straight out of high school. Couldn't get more fun than that. But the shows were all real small. Like, you know, like basically nobody knew about Superchunk except for like in Chicago and Philadelphia and maybe like Chicago, Chapel Hill, and I'd say Boston, Cambridge were like the only places where people like knew who Superchunk were. And other than that, it was just us playing tiny shows. I think we had a really good show in Minneapolis as well. You know, there was like the little places where people collected records and they knew about us, you know.
Well, how'd you guys book it? Because you guys didn't have Book Your Own Fucking Life back then, right?
Right. No, you just, I think Mac booked it, but Jenny Toomey, from Simple Machines, her band at the time, Geek, was the opener. I think that maybe she booked it. I don't know. I certainly didn't book it. I don't know who did. I just got into the truck.
It's just so wild to think about like the progression of tours, because you guys are in a van or whatever it was with maybe a built-in loft, and then it's payphones to reach out to the next spot and hope that there's a show. There was no email or text messaging or cell phones or any of that shit.
No, exactly. I mean, like from the majority of the years of Seaweed, there was no email. I remember like our booking agent towards the end of Seaweed was like, you have to get an email address. I can't call you. It's like
Seaweed at hotmail.com or AOL.
Right, exactly.
That's fucking wild. So you guys reach out to Sub Pop. And you're like, hey, we just toured with these guys. You should sign it. I mean, obviously, I'm downplaying that, but like, why did you want to get on Sub Pop?
Because we liked a lot of the records they put out, and because I knew Bruce, and because we knew where they were. You know, like the difference between like having a record label in Minneapolis and one in Seattle, where you could drive an hour and like see them face to face, made a big difference.
What was like your criteria for getting on a label? Did you just want to have? Did you want tour support? Did you want just like what did you envision?
Just to get records in stores, you know. I don't think like Sub Pop ever gave us like tour support as far as money, but they did. There was a period of time where like they had Sub Pop vans, and you could like book the van, and they would give you the van. And then like one time when we were using those vans, like our van broke down and they like bought another van. It wasn't our van. It was a Sub Pop bought a new van, but like we literally like had the van bought for us, and we're back on the road. And I think we missed like one show.
I've like never heard of a label having a stockpile of vans. That's fucking amazing.
Well, a stockpile, I think it was like 2 vans.
Still though, like just even having like, this is the record label's van, so you guys can come and use them and then go on tour with them.
Right. And then I kind of worked at Sub Pop a little bit for a couple of years doing vinyl sales and stuff. Like at one point, the dwarves had like left a van, basically like had broken down and just left it on the side of the road and just like bailed. And like myself and another employee of Sub Pop like went down in a rental car to get it.
Really?
And drove it back.
Jesus Christ. So did you start working there?
I don't really like remember. I mean, that was a long time ago. I don't like remember all the details of it, but I know like what inspired me to quit my job. I had a job on the weekends where I was like teaching swimming lessons at this very shishi health club in Seattle. Because at this point I was living in Seattle. I was the only member of Seaweed that lived in Seattle during that time, for the record. My buddy was like, if you drive down there with me, this will be the payment or whatever. I can't remember. And it was like 3 times as much as I was going to make at my shift at the fancy health club. So I just like basically quit. And that health club was like Saturday morning, teaching swimming lessons like really early in the morning. Like I was always at a show the night before, and it was rough, you know. I'd be ruined. And my job was selling vinyl, actually, because at the time they had a deal with Caroline to distribute all their CDs, but they had no deal for vinyl, and so all the vinyl sales were in-house. And so I was the vinyl salesman for Sub Pop, which was pretty fun.
So basically, like, when people would place an order at that time, they would just send in a money order or, like, call in? Like, how are they buying?
What I would do, I would cold call the stores and basically read them. Well, I would cold call the stores, and I would fax them an order at the same time. So then I would call them and be like, oh, you should order this record. Like, I mean, during the time, I only did it for about maybe a year and a half, I think. But the records I was pushing, like, as the vinyl salesperson, you could actually push product. Not a ton. It's not like it's going to make a huge difference. But you could be like, I was big into this Love Battery record, Dayglow. I love that record. Of course, as the vinyl salesman, you're always like trying to sell the underdog record, because it wasn't hard to sell the Afghan Wigs record or I think Reverend Horton Heat. That was selling pretty well then, you know. Those records you didn't have to push because people would just buy them. But like you'd always have your like loser under record that wasn't being bought that you liked.
Did you get it? So when you were doing that, did you get to have? This is going to lead into my next question. Did you get to get a lot of free records from Sub Pop because of this?
In fact, actually, when we signed with Sub Pop, I got Poneman to tell me that I would get free records for life, and they have actually stood by that. Like if I want something on Sub Pop, I mean, at this point, I do actually buy hard copies of stuff sometimes, but very rarely because of just the way that music is now. You don't really need it. But I like to listen to hard copy sometime. If I like something, I like to listen to it like as it was made by the artist. But so if I want something from Sub Pop, I can actually just email my friend there, and he knows of the verbal contract. But it's not even that. They're happy to give me stuff.
That's wild.
So I've actually like followed Sub Pop as a record label the whole time. Like really, literally, because before I was on the record label, I knew Bruce, and I like had literally their first releases. So more or less, I followed them the whole time. I mean, now less. I follow them definitely less. But there's stuff I like on there.
I just heard an interview with them before I ask the next question. They just got interviewed on How I Built This with Guy Raz for NPR. One of the guys, he lives in like the woods somewhere. He just went off the grid. It was I started listening to it, but I should go back and like listen to the whole thing. It was just fascinating just having them tell their story about it's like, you know, they're talking about the time of Nirvana popping off and all that shit.
Yeah, I was actually working at Sub Pop at the time when Nirvana popped off.
So like okay, a couple things there. The lead in I was having before that you got to get all the free records. So then that basically puts you in kind of this bubble of Sub Pop sound, I guess. So do you think that having those records from that label and having them, I don't know if you had like a stockpile of them and you're listening to them, do you think that had an effect on the songs that you were writing in Seaweed?
Probably not that much, because I mean, I listen to like a lot of back when I got free Sub Pop records, I was listening to a ton of different music, and Sub Pop wasn't like the top of my record stack for sure.
Okay.
Not even close. Occasionally there would be, but we did play with the bands, but we also had grown up with those bands. Like before when I was telling you about the clubs in Tacoma,
mm-hmm.
A lot of those bands, particularly like Nirvana and the Melvins not being a Sub Pop band, but basically since all the bands ripped them off, they are like the origin band and Soundgarden. I'd seen and Malfunction. I'd seen all those bands a lot as a teenager.
So then when you're working at Sub Pop and then Nirvana pops off, I think I might have asked you this earlier, but did you see that as an open door for you guys to go, all right, cool, we have, like, there's an opening for us here. We're on this label. This band just blew up. This is going to help us to grow the band.
I don't think so, because we were already like having momentum, and we hated the concept of grunge. Like, we considered ourselves a punk band, and we considered Nirvana a punk band for that matter. And like we really didn't intend to end up on a major label. I mean, that did happen, but we just wanted to we were playing exclusively all ages shows during that period of time, and like the concept of grunge, that was kind of something that came out of the bars. It was kind of like more of a major label-esque product ready. Like, it was for adults, and it was drunk, and that
flannel
wasn't really
shirts.
what we did. Right, exactly. I mean, flannel shirts are good, and they're punk. Like the flannel shirts, they're like before grunge, That's like what the Circle Jerks mosh kid has a flannel shirt wrapped around his waist. Don't forget.
Uh-huh.
That was like mid-80s. The Minutemen were flying the flannel. Flannel shirts that's just like what you wear in Washington, because you get it at the thrift store really cheap and it keeps you warm.
Did you find, like, being on Sub Pop, what kind of perks did you see? Because you guys put out Despised in 91, and then you got Weak in 4, and then you get Spanaway out in 95. So you got 91, 92, 93, and then 95 is what Wikipedia is saying. So pretty much almost every year you're putting out a record, and you're staying on Sub Pop until 95, and you're on Hollywood Records.
We left Sub Pop basically in 94.
Why though? Like, what did you get out of that, and why'd you guys leave?
We finished our contract, basically. Like, we had done the 3 records that they signed us to. They were having a hard time getting our records in the stores at that point, and they were going through a hard time. Like, if you actually look at what happened to Sub Pop, from they had all this money, but they didn't really know what to do with it. They thought they were a major label, but they weren't. It's like, if you kind of if you really were studying Sub Pop, which I have been a student of in a way, it's like they don't really get their shit together again until 2001 with the Shins. Like, really,
oh yeah,
what blew up? Can you think of a record that sold really well or that was super well loved? I mean, I can think of some records that are super well loved in '98, 2 of them, but there's not a whole lot from '94 to 2001. And they were kind of they weren't putting out really much rock records. They were kind of putting out indie rock, and kind of they went through a whole kind of no depression country thing. And we were kind of too of an older era for them. And at the same time, every record label on earth every major label record wants to put your record out and pay you a bunch of money. So what are you going to do? I mean, in retrospect, I wish I would have done it that way, but honestly, I don't really look back much.
So during that time, you guys were just doing the basic, just touring, and then pretty much at that time too, because you guys have a bunch of music videos that I saw on YouTube. You had
Right.
a handful. So you're on Sub Pop, you're touring, and you're putting out music videos, and you're putting out records. I would say that Spanaway was kind of where you guys got more notice, because I felt with that song got more reach. But that's my perspective.
I think that really what happened is 4 Kid Candy and the cover of Go Your Own Way got a lot of airplay, and the Kid Candy video actually got a fair amount of play on MTV, not on regular rotation, but in their ghettos, 120 minutes, etc. We actually gained a lot of popularity on 4, and then we were hoping to take it to the next level on Spanaway, which we didn't actually. Spanaway sold more than 4, but considering how much corporate backing it had, it wasn't really that much more. And we toured a lot of Spanaway. Don't get me wrong, I love that record. But I don't like it I love 4 in a certain way, even though I may like songs better from that, because 4, Clint recorded in the basement of the Seaweed where he lived. It was really our most punk rock record in that way. Like, it was 100% homegrown, and that's like 100% opposite of what Spanaway was. We had intended to record it ourselves, but the record label wouldn't let us in the end. Big surprise, the major label lied to us.
What do you mean?
Well, they said that we could record our own record, like, basically, and that was our intent. Like, our intent was to, like, pocket all the money and, like, buy houses and stuff and just record our own record, like, punk rock style, like we did the record before. But that's, like, not at all what happened. We, like, really spent a lot of money recording that record and mixed it with Andy Wallace, who, like, mixed all the Nevermind and all the Slayer records, which was fun. Totally fun. You know, we just ended up spending a lot of money on that record.
What was like the vibe in the band for the whole time, like, between but getting on Sub Pop for Despise, then going and then around, then up to Spanaway where you guys leave and go to Hollywood? Like, internally, like, what did that look like?
What I would say is the more money we made, the more unhappy we were.
Really?
Is what I would say. Yeah, like, the more money we made, the farther we got away from the vision, and the more time we just spent working on business logistics, and the less happy we were for the most part. I would say that, like, and we toured a lot on 4, like a long time on the road. I think 3 U.S. tours and then like a couple British Isles only tours. And we were tired at the end of that. And then we just like recorded Spanaway and then went back out for like another 9 months.
Jesus.
And at the end of Spanaway, we were just destroyed. I mean, really, we didn't break up till 99 and we like put out another record and played some more shows, but not very many. But really, by the end of the Spanaway cycle, we never really toured. We might have played like 2 more weeks of shows, maybe 3. I'd say 3 more weeks of shows, maybe a month maximum. But like, we never really toured like we were before. It kind of, in a way, ended in 96. It didn't officially end in 96, and we did probably play like 3 weeks or a month more shows, probably a month more. But compared to what we were doing before, comparing how active we were between like 91 and 96,
yeah,
and then like at the end of 96, we just kind of like in 97, more or less at the end, at the end of 97, I moved here. So we all kind of, we were living apart, and Alan was living in New York, so we were hardly even, our proximity was far away, you know.
So, like, did you guys find around 95, because that's when Green Day broke in, what, like
94.
94. So then the punk thing starts taking over, and you guys could kind of go back and forth between being in the, you know, quote-unquote grunge bands, and I felt like you guys could also slide into, like, punk shows. Like, did you find that when all that shit...
We could play punk shows, you know, but, like, honestly, the type of punk that we were didn't get popular until later, like, after we weren't even playing, like, without the drive-in. The kind of punk band that we are hadn't actually, no one had been able to pigeonhole us yet. And, like, the punk that was... The shows that we would play were more like the punk you were talking about that you liked, like the stuff from Southern California.
Yeah.
Like, and we weren't really like that because we had loud guitars and we did weird indie rock stuff. We weren't really like those bands.
I felt like you guys would have fit well on a show with Quicksand, which wasn't punk. Like that, there was like this gap between, like, sure, Green Day was on MTV and they were on the radio and they were popular and they had that poppy punk sound, the Lookout Record sound. And then No Effects and all that was coming up, which wasn't on the radio. But then you guys are on 120 Minutes, which is deemed more alternative rock, is what they were calling it back then, right? And so there was really no solid bridge between the two. It was kind of, I felt like either or. So it must feel, for me, in my perspective, for you guys to have all these music videos on MTV and you're touring and you're on Sub Pop, which is connected to, in everyone's mind, to Nirvana, to go out and then show up at a club show and then play with a pop punk band might have been a little bit difficult to share that bill, where kids were like, wait, we don't understand this. Like, how are these guys mixing it with this poppy sound that's playing, like, Less Than Jake or fucking like Pennywise or something, right? Like, it didn't seem like you guys would fit on that bill.
Yeah, to me, like most of those bands, like that you're mentioning, like the kind of epitaph bands, the majority of them were pretty cookie cutter. I mean, not to diss them, but like all those bands are fairly much the same. And that's what I feel like their fans wanted. And not just that they wanted that, but they also wanted to know about the act prior to play. They weren't really the most open-eared group, I'd say.
Oh, totally.
But you mentioned Quicksand. We did do 2 tours with Quicksand, and we shared a drummer at the end, and they're friends of ours. But also, that's the Revelation crew, and the Revelation crew is again different than the West Coast punk, but still not the most open-minded group of folks either. I'd say they want to like know about their bands, and they want them to be on Revelation, and they love the Revelation bands, and then the other bands maybe not so much.
Actually, now that you say that, I feel like you guys would have fit on those bills with Game Face or Far Side or Texas the Reason.
We played with definitely with Texas the Reason more, because that was more like what we were like.
Yeah.
But again, they were kind of like after us, like after we were really doing much anyway. So
did you guys kind of feel around that time, because you said between burning out on the road and you said you're making more money and it's just kind of just making you guys more divisive, and then you got the scene around you changing. Do you guys feel it's right towards the end there that you, besides all that, like you just didn't really know where to fit at that point in like 95, 96?
Yeah, I'd say more like 97, but in 95, 96 we were playing lots of shows, and sometimes they were good and sometimes they were not, but we were just constantly grinding, because that's supposedly what you do to sell records.
Well, and then what was like the fun? Actually, real quick, what is because I just remember this from the thing that the smallest things that make a record stand out to people is a couple songs or a song that's a hit, and then the album artwork. So then, like that, this is such a stupid question, but I want to ask it anyway. Like the green lighter, was that a photo that was taken like while you guys were on tour? Or was that a photo shot? Or photo shoot?
I'm actually holding that green lighter. That was like Atkins, the bass player for Seaweed. We're real good friends to this day. We actually play in a band now together called Major Treasure, and there's some songs up on Bandcamp, but it's just kind of a joke band about fishing and boating, and I'm the drummer and the guitar player, and we've always been pretty tight. I mean, when we knew each other from long ago, because we were earlier when I was telling you about like how some of us had played in punk bands at the Community World before we formed Seaweed, the Community World Theater. I don't know if it's on there somewhere.
Yeah.
Anyway, the beloved Community World Theater that we all loved in Tacoma. Adkins was kind of a fixture there as well as I was, and we knew each other from back then. Now, he had a car. I don't even remember what it was, like a finned car, like some sort of Plymouth. It was him driving and me holding the lighter, and that was the picture. I can't remember who took the picture, honestly. I can't remember if it was Charles Peterson or who. Me and Clint were smoking a lot of pot then, and I think that probably had something to do with it. And Spanaway was definitely influenced by pot. For the record, I don't smoke pot anymore or drink. I'm more or less, I'm straight edge, really. And I always kind of gravitated from when I was like 17, now I'm 49. I have kind of often been straight edge, but I've more or less been straight edge since I was 35. But at the time, I was smoking tons of pot, and I'm sure the green lighter had something to do with that.
Yeah, I was going to ask if there was like a significance, because sometimes there's a hidden, it's usually like on the nose of what the art is, or there's this hidden meaning that defines kind of the internal, an internal conversation or joke in a band. So that's interesting. Yeah,
definitely. Spanaway was like, to me, I think it's our most psychedelic record for sure. I mean, it's not like psychedelic like the Grateful Dead, but it's fairly psychedelic in its own right, I think, for Seaweed.
Did you guys feel like, were you just smoking a shit ton of pot while you were in the studio, or was it when you were writing the songs?
Yeah, just me and Clint, really, honestly. I don't think Wade smoked pot, and Adkins probably did here and there, but Clint and I did a lot, not just at the studio, just all the time, like we were big heads, like when we were writing and stuff. And so, I don't know, if you listen to that record on headphones, it has a lot of weird kind of mixing stuff and second drummer stuff. And I mean, I think like, because we're a punk band, you don't maybe hear it as much, you know?
Yeah.
But if you were to like put that record on and listen to it on headphones, like a real copy of it, not like, you know, an MP3, you'd hear actually how weird some of the stuff is.
I think there's like, I feel like the guitar parts in that kind of, like, just off the top of my head would kind of stand out as that, like, just initial, before listening to it again and like thinking about that. Well, cool, man. So a couple questions, I'll let you go. So like, what was like at the end there, because you guys have Actions and Indications that came out later on in '99. Did you guys get back together and record that, like, or on merge and put that on merge? Like, what's the story about that?
It wasn't like we were get back together because we hadn't broken up and we had written most of that record like after Spanaway. It just hadn't come out because we parted ways with Hollywood. And then I was often still up in Washington then, like, even though I lived down here. My parents live in Washington. They don't live in Tacoma, but they live west of Tacoma, about 20 minutes. And I mean, on every year I usually go up there, obviously not this year. So every year I go up to Washington and Canada and Oregon in the summer. As a nurse, you get these like long periods of time off. Like, I think I get 6 weeks off a year, and I usually like to take a big chunk and leave for Washington in the summer because I like, you know, the days are really long. The light is beautiful. And then like where we live, it fills up with tourists in the summer. So it's a good time to blow out of here, you know, particularly like if you work in ER, that's when it gets busy usually, is when the tourists are in town because people hurt themselves when they're on vacation. Everybody does. I think I must have been up there and Superchunk played, and they're like old friends of ours. You know, we did multiple tours with them, and we went to the show, and we just were like, so you want to put our record out? And they're like, yeah.
That's cool.
Then we just recorded it. I mean, at the time, Clint had a recording studio, so it was really easy just to record it. It happened pretty quickly. It's kind of funny. I think that I also like recorded that Gardner record that came out on Sub Pop was the record that I put out personally after Seaweed, which actually has a Seaweed song on it that I re-recorded called Outside Looking In. And I think I recorded the Gardner record at the same studio, like almost at the same time, like within a couple weeks, you know. Seems like I was at that studio for a long time in one summer. So we put the record out. We played a long tour in Brazil, like 2 weeks in Brazil, and then literally like a week on the West Coast, one show in Chapel Hill, and we were done.
So you guys, tell me you didn't drive to Chapel Hill, like you flew out there.
No, we flew. Yeah, no, we flew there. Okay. It was like a merge. It was a merge. I think it was the 10-year merge anniversary, if I remember right. It was one of the merge anniversary shows. And it was like the early one. It must have been 10 because it was small compared to like I think the other merge shows. Those are fun shows. We did one for Sub Pop too. I think we did the 20-year for Sub Pop.
Oh, that's cool. Where in Chapel Hill did you guys play? Because I live in Raleigh, and I just found out.
At the Cat's Cradle.
Oh shit!
Yeah.
That's awesome.
I think that was in '99. It must have been July of '99 is I think when it was actually. Yeah, that was actually our last show. But then, you know, in 2008 we got back together and played 13 shows.
What like brought that on? Just for the hell of it, or was that the Sub Pop?
Well, we did play the Sub Pop thing, but that's more or less what happened was I was playing a band at that time called the Blue Dot here in Mendo. That record's up on Spotify. I'm real proud of that record. I love it. Blue Dot, Diamond Light. And Adkins has a band called the Fucking Eagles. They're still a band, but they were kind of just starting up right then in 2008, and we used to play together like whenever possible. And I would go up and play in Tacoma and Seattle and Olympia probably once a year or something, just to play in Tacoma because it's, you know, my hometown. And so it seemed like every year we were playing shows together. Oh, and I think Wade was playing in the Fucking Eagles during that time. So I was like, it's almost like the whole Seaweed is playing shows together. And someone was like, do you want to play some Seaweed shows? Songs, not shows. You want to play some Seaweed songs at one of the shows? And I was like, because sometimes I would sing a song with Atkins' band, the Fucking Eagles, too, like this cover. It's called Stop and Think It Over. It's like an old 60s cover. Mm. I was like, you know, if we're going to play Seaweed songs, I'd rather just, like, play them together. Not necessarily, like, let's do a reunion. But I was like, if we're going to play Seaweed songs, let's just play them together.
Yeah.
Like, let's just practice. We don't have to play a show. We don't have to do anything, but we could just practice. That's what we did. I don't think we practiced with Clint because I think he was living in Ohio at the time. So the three of us and our friend Jesse, who was kind of a friend from the old school, played drums because we weren't going to like have Alan come out from New York to practice. And Jesse had been around for the whole time. So he was our third drummer, and we practiced, and it was fun. And so I think I was able to talk Clint into playing the show. He was always kind of like dragging his feet. To this day, he thinks that it's a mistake that we ever played again.
Why?
Because he said the good bands don't play again. He was like, it's better not to have old pictures of yourself on the internet and just that kind of stuff, you know. Like, I don't know. The only band that didn't play again is like Fugazi and Rites of Spring. They're like literally the only ones. And I'm pretty sure Fugazi just has practiced. But like, I just don't care about that shit. It was fun. Most of the shows were fun. I'd say of the 13, 10 or 11 were fun, you know. And we played in Spain. We played like in Spain. We played in New York. We played in Florida.
Damn.
And then I think the rest of the shows were like on the in Oregon or Washington. I think that's it. No, we played in Austin. Yeah, we played the Fun Fest in Austin. That was really fun. That was 2 of the shows.
That's cool, man. That's awesome. You guys have the ability or had the ability to just kind of get together and just be able to jump on shows like that and be like, oh, we're gonna just play fucking Spain.
Right. I mean, basically the caveat was like I only wanted to play one show at a time, and it did kind of push me to playing 2 shows at a time. But like for now, I don't think I could even play a Seaweed show. Like I don't think my voice would hold up to it. I could probably do it for 3 songs, and then my voice would just get tattered. And that's basically what would happen even back then, 12 years ago. I could make it through a show, but then the next day my voice would be tattered. And like honestly, through a huge amount of the time Seaweed was touring, my voice was tattered.
Well, yeah, because you had like the vocals they're rough, not like bad rough, but like you have a hard, what's the term I'm looking for? There's like a roughness to your vocal style from Seaweed. So I could tell that must have just been shredding your fucking vocal cords the whole time.
Exactly. And it's like one thing to do that at 23. It's a different thing to be doing it at 43, or 49. So, I mean, because like when I sing with Ghostwork, I mean, we don't play a show, but I record those songs, and I'm amazed at how quickly my voice is rough. Like, I mean, as you can hear now, my voice is rough. But like, if I was to sing for an hour, I'd be like talking like this already, you know?
Yeah.
And that's how I talked to all those years in Seaweed. So I think there's like a fair amount of full-time damage that is done here that will be, who knows what has happened. But I think my vocal cords are kind of like sandpaper now. There's
a video on YouTube. There's this woman. She specializes in helping the screamo bands actually train their voices so they can do that and then talk normal afterwards. It's almost like where she charges, I think, like $300 an hour. Like she's pretty expensive, but she'll train like Keith from Every Time I Die, which is like a band that it's really this guy's voice he just screams the whole time and he can talk normal. It's like, goddamn, where was she back in the day for?
Well, they actually took some vocal lessons for this weird opera singer guy in LA, and he taught me all these warm-ups, and it did help if you did them. But the funny thing is, like, if you're in a punk band, like, the chances are you're not going to do like 2 hours of warm-ups.
Yeah.
You know, like, it's not really what your lifestyle is like. Mick Jagger can like really like spent his entire day dedicated to warming up because he's like making like literally $1 million for the show. But like if you're just playing a punk show, there's probably like something more interesting to do besides vocal exercises, and you're friggin' lazy, and it's punk rock.
I don't know, man. Would we be on tour, we'd show up, I'm like, okay, well, we got 5 hours to kill before we have to go on at 9 o'clock at night. What the fuck are we going to do?
Right, do you want to do 5 hours of vocal exercises? I don't think so. Like,
no.
You know.
Yeah, it was definitely, well, we couldn't really go anywhere around town because we had no money, so we did kind of just figure something out that whole time.
Right.
Well, cool, man. Well, I'll wrap this up because I want to just be cautious of your day, and I really appreciate you taking time to fucking talk. And I always end it with two questions. The first one is, what would you like to plug? And it can either be about what's something you're doing, or you can give some love to somebody else who's doing something, or you could do both.
I'll do both. I've been listening to this new Lanigan record. I love it. The Straight Songs of Sorrow. It's really weird, and I feel like as he's gotten older, he's making weirder records. They're like less produced and more kind of like home recordings. So it's strange record. I love it. I just finished Utopian Avenue by David Mitchell. It is by far the best rock and roll novel I've ever read, and I love it. I love all the David Mitchell books, and it's kind of like the last part of a trilogy that starts with Bone Clocks. In the middle is that 10,000 or 1,000 Autumns of David Zoot, or whatever his name is, Jacob Zoot. But it's like awesome sci-fi psychedelic rock and roll book.
Okay.
Highly recommended. And then if you want to listen to the music I'm doing now, it's on Bandcamp. I mean, it's just like my home recordings. Just find it with Aaron Stauffer. And then there's the band with me and Adkins, Major Treasure. I think like 30 people have listened to the song. So you'll be amongst a very small crowd of people listening to me and Adkins' band. So, and then there's Ghostwork, the band that I do. So, and that's everywhere. There'll be another album sometime, maybe in 2021.
Yeah, and you guys just do that remote. Like you said you have not met those guys in person?
Yeah, I think that I met the bass player, Dustin, at a Seaweed show in the 90s. And then Aaron, the drummer, I know that we played a show together. I can't remember if it was Gardner or the Blue Dot, one of those bands. I think it was Gardner. Played with Kill Sadie, and he was drummer for that band. I don't remember ever talking to him, but we did actually play a show together. But as far as the other two people, well, no, one of them's me, so I know myself, kind of. But the guy, Sean, that writes all the songs, that was the drummer for Mile Marker, I've never met him. I've seen him on the computer, like I've talked to him.
That's so funny.
It's cool. I mean,
random.
I actually really like that style of band, honestly. I like it because it's like Seaweed in a way, even though I knew those guys. But in that band, I mostly just sang. I maybe wrote 2 or 3 songs in Seaweed, and other than that, I sang on someone else's songs. It's like, besides my high school band, there's been like no bands like that. Otherwise, I usually write the songs. So it's kind of fun to like do your singing and lyric writing to somebody else's songs. It makes you approach it differently, and you interact with the song differently than if it's like something that actually came from you.
Yeah, that's gonna be all. Yeah, it's good stuff too, man. Like I said, when I was researching how the hell to get in touch with you, I just stumbled across that, and I was listening to it. I was like, "Fuck, this is awesome."
Yeah, I'm excited about the second record. I think it's better. It's kind of like slower. It's being approached at a slower pace because, Aaron can't really do drums right now. I mean, he probably could if he had his own studio, but, if you're shutting down properly, you can't. Hopefully that'll change. I got both my vaccinations now, and it's been 3 weeks out, I think. So, it's been a week out. So I think I have 95% immunity in theory. I think hopefully the world's change.
Real quick on that note, just because you are in the medical profession and people listening are probably, there's probably that random person out there who thinks they're getting a microchip or fucking, they're going to get sick. Like, did you have any, this has nothing to do with the podcast, but since you have this platform, did you feel anything, any of the side effects from it, or, what are your thoughts on it?
The first shot, I felt no side effects. I got the Pfizer one, by the way, and the first half, I got no side effects except for a sore arm. Just like if you got sometimes people get a sore arm for the flu shot. I have before, or a tetanus shot gives you a sore arm, it seems like, I'd say the first part of the shot, I felt that. And then the second shot, I definitely got a sore arm, and my joints were a little sore the next day, But to me, that is a small risk compared to, not being able to breathe and or having long-term lung scarring or inflammatory cardiac problems. I mean, it's only a small percentage of people that get this inflammatory response, but the inflammatory response can not only kill you, but it can also change your life in such a way that fucks your lungs up and or your heart. potentially for the rest of your life.
Yeah, a buddy of mine got it a couple weeks ago, and he got it fucking bad, and he's only 42, 43, and I mean he had a very stressful lifestyle. He has opened up a bunch of businesses, and he's had a business for a while. So this thing he had to get to the ER, and he's on like a heart monitor now, and it's been 4 weeks since he got it. So shit's fucking crazy.
Yeah, I really encourage people to get the vaccination. I mean, I believe in vaccination. It is really the cornerstone of Western medicine, and I just don't think there's a microchip in it. I think who knows? You obviously can't say 100% there isn't, but it seems very unlikely that that we would pay that much money to put a microchip in everybody, and B, that like a microchip could go through a little tiny needle. It seems unlikely to me, but people can believe you can actually make up anything and believe it, and other people might believe it. And, I get it. It's fun to believe in conspiracy theories, but it's not fun to die of not being able to breathe and, having terrible chest pain and scarring your heart and lungs for the rest of your life. And I mean, what I can tell you is that it is real that people get really sick. I know that.
Yeah, you see it.
Yeah.
Well, cool, man. Well, sorry. So last question, I'll let you go. What punk rock ethics do you hold on to this day?
I mean, I guess I really do search for the truth. I do believe this kind of ties into the last thing. I do believe that the man profits from the lie, and that we are often meant to not feel whole so we can be sold product. And I see that particularly with women. I have a daughter in college, and I just really would say to everybody that you are okay, and you have the kingdom of heaven, or what the universe, in your heart, and you are a divine creature, and you do not need products to make you okay.